For over 1,000 years, slavery was a grim reality across much of the globe, stretching from Europe and Africa to Asia and the Middle East. While many of us have learned about the transatlantic slave trade, there's another vast and long-lasting system that often remains in the shadows of our history books: the Islamic slave trade. This complex network connected Africa, the Middle East, and even parts of Asia for centuries, shaping societies, economies, and cultures in ways we are only beginning to fully understand. Welcome to History's Turning Point. I'm your host, Sir Historious, and today we're embarking on a journey into a difficult but crucial chapter of our shared past. We'll explore the history of the Islamic slave trade, looking at where it happened, how it functioned, and why acknowledging it is essential for a complete picture of world history. Our goal here isn't to assign blame, but to seek understanding. After all, history can only teach us when we are open to learning from all its chapters, even the most challenging ones. So, when and where did this all take place? The Islamic slave trade began much earlier than the transatlantic trade, starting around the 7th century and continuing in some regions well into the 20th century. It wasn't a single, monolithic system, but a series of interconnected networks that evolved over more than a millennium. Its reach was enormous, spanning from the Swahili coast of East Africa, across the vast Sahara Desert, and through the Red Sea and Indian Ocean. Let's visualize the major trade routes. One of the most significant was the Trans-Saharan route. Caravans of camels, often numbering in the thousands, made the grueling journey from West African empires like Mali and Songhai, through desert oases, to markets in North Africa, such as those in Morocco, Algiers, and Cairo. These weren't just trade routes for gold and salt, they were conduits for human beings, captured and sold into a new life of servitude. Simultaneously, another major network thrived along the Swahili coast in East Africa. From ports like Zanzibar and Kilwa, Dhows traditional sailing vessels transported enslaved people across the Indian Ocean. Their destinations were varied: the Arabian Peninsula, Persia, which is modern-day Iran, the Ottoman Empire, and even as far as India and China. This Indian Ocean trade was ancient, but it intensified dramatically under Arab and Swahili Arab influence. A third, less discussed route ran north from East Africa through the Nile River Valley and the Red Sea, feeding into markets in Egypt and the Middle East. Each of these routes had its own distinct characteristics, but they all contributed to a massive, centuries-long displacement of people. Historians estimate that millions were forcibly moved along these paths, a number that is incredibly difficult to pinpoint, but undoubtedly rivals other major slave systems. Now, who were the people enslaved in this system? Unlike the race-based chattel slavery that defined the transatlantic system, the Islamic slave trade was, at least in theory, not based on race. Early Islamic law prohibited the enslavement of freeborn Muslims. Consequently, the primary source of enslaved people came from outside the borders of the Islamic world, or Dar al-Islam. This included people from sub-Saharan Africa, Central Asia, the Caucasus region, and even parts of Europe, particularly Slavs from the East, from whom the very word slave originates. However, over time, as the trade routes solidified, sub-Saharan Africa became the most consistent and largest source. People were captured through raids, warfare between different African states, or as tribute payments. Once enslaved, their roles varied enormously. It's a common misconception to think of this system in the same terms as the plantation slavery of the Americas. While some did work in agriculture, particularly in sugar and cotton production in places like Iraq and Zanzibar, many were destined for other roles. Many women were forced into domestic servitude or became concubines and harems, where their status and the status of their children could be complex. Their children with the free man were often born free, a significant difference from the American system where the child's status followed the mother. Men were often employed as soldiers known as Mamluks or Janissaries, who could sometimes rise to positions of immense power. Some even became rulers themselves. Others were castrated to become eunuchs, serving as guards for harems or as trusted court administrators. This diversity of roles meant that the experience of slavery was not uniform. It was shaped by gender, skill, location, and sheer luck. So, how does this system compare to other forms of slavery, particularly the transatlantic trade? It's crucial to draw distinctions without creating a hierarchy of suffering. The transatlantic slave trade was unique in its scale over a shorter period. Its industrial nature focused on plantation agriculture and its foundation in a rigid, racial ideology that dehumanized Africans to justify their perpetual, heritable enslavement. In contrast, the Islamic slave trade lasted much longer, was geographically more diffuse, and involved a wider variety of roles for the enslaved. Manumission, or the freeing of a slave, was considered a virtuous act in Islam and was more common. As mentioned, the children of a male owner and an enslaved woman were often born free and integrated into society. This led to more social mobility and assimilation over generations than was possible in the Americas. However, we must not romanticize this. The journey itself, the death marches across the Sahara, or the horrific conditions on dhows was incredibly brutal, with mortality rates that were often staggering. The practice of castration resulted in immense suffering and high death tolls. And for millions, servitude was a life of hardship and lost freedom, regardless of the specific system. So why does understanding this forgotten chapter of history matter today? First, it provides a more complete and global perspective on slavery. It reminds us that slavery was not unique to one culture, region, or religion. It was a deeply embedded human institution for most of history. Acknowledging this prevents us from oversimplifying the past and falling into narratives of singular villains and victims. Second, it helps us understand the historical roots of modern-day Africa and the Middle East. The centuries of raiding and trading depopulated entire regions, destabilized societies, and created lasting legacies of mistrust and conflict. It also explains the presence of significant African diaspora communities in places like Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and the Arabian Peninsula, whose histories are often overlooked. Finally, confronting this history helps us challenge our own assumptions. History is rarely neat and tidy. It's complex, contradictory, and often uncomfortable. By exploring topics like the Islamic slave trade with honesty and respect, we develop a more nuanced and mature understanding of the human story. It forces us to ask difficult questions, like why some histories are remembered and taught, while others are forgotten or ignored. And that brings me to a question for you. Join the conversation respectfully in the comments below. Why do you think some parts of history, like this one, are so much less discussed than others? Is it about politics, discomfort, or simply a lack of information? I'm genuinely curious to hear your thoughts. History is a tool for understanding, not a weapon for accusation. If you value clear, honest, and respectful explorations of our past, please consider liking this video and subscribing to History's Turning Point. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you won't miss our next episode. Thank you for joining me today as we strive to learn from all of history's turning points.